All right, let's jump right into this. Have you ever wondered how two anti-corporate kids, basically the absolute outcasts of their gym class, somehow managed to turn their biggest physical and financial deficits into one of the most recognizable billion-dollar empires in the world? Well, today, in this explainer, we are looking at the wildly fascinating story of Ben and Jerry. We're going to see exactly how these two friends took a massive amount of rejection, a few very unconventional ideas, and a totally DIY spirit to create a global ice cream phenomenon. It's honestly a masterclass in turning weaknesses into undeniable strengths. So let's unpack exactly how they pulled the whole shebang off.
Now, every great empire has an origin story, right? But Ben and Jerry's, it definitely didn't start with some brilliant, polished business plan. It started with shared struggles. Back in the early 1960s, Ben and Jerry were essentially known as the slowest kids in their gym class. Literally, Ben was actively arguing with his gym teacher over running a mile in under 7 minutes, while Jerry was struggling so hard that he actually fainted. But, that shared misery really forged their friendship. Fast forward to the 1970s, and honestly, things weren't looking much better for either of them. Jerry wanted to be a doctor, but he was rejected by over 40 medical schools, eventually ending up working as a lab tech, mashing cow hearts into test tubes. Meanwhile, Ben was scraping food leftovers as a janitor and just totally failing at trying to make a living selling his homemade pottery. These were two guys deeply unhappy with how their lives were turning out, which eventually led to a massive pivot in 1978.
So, that brings us to Section 1, the Accidental Ice Cream Men, searching for a way out.
By 1973, Jerry had moved to New York to live with Ben, and the two friends were just desperate for a way out of their dead-end jobs. Ben wanted to avoid bowing down to corporate authority, and Jerry desperately wanted to stop blending animal organs for a living, which, fair enough. Their very first grand idea? Fresh bagels. But that plan completely fell apart when they realized the equipment alone would cost $40,000. They simply didn't have it. No way. So what did they do? They pivoted to what they figured would be a much cheaper alternative: ice cream. But here's the kicker. Neither of them actually knew how to make it. So they literally enrolled in a $5 correspondence course from Penn State just to learn the basics. A $5 course instead of a $40,000 machine. I mean, talk about a scrappy start.
And that scrappy, low-budget spirit, it completely defined their brand from day one. To get off the ground, they pulled together their savings and managed to get a $4,000 bank loan. But the only location they could actually afford was this abandoned gas station in Vermont. It was in extremely rough shape. The roof had literally fallen in, and they had to hack through 4 inches of solid ice on the floor just to move their stuff inside. But it was right across from a busy park, so they made it work. They built their work tables out of the absolute cheapest lumber they could find, bought equipment from clearance auctions at failed restaurants, and remember Ben's failed pottery business? Well, those homemade bowls and cups finally found a use as their serving dishes.
Moving on to Section 2, the anosmia advantage. Finding a revolutionary flavor.
Okay, so Jerry had nailed the basics of making ice cream thanks to that $5 course, and he started using his biochemistry background to experiment. But they both knew that basic, run-of-the-mill ice cream wasn't going to be enough to stand out in the market. They needed something revolutionary. And that's where Ben's physical limitation actually became their secret weapon. See, Ben has a condition called anosmia. What that means is he has virtually no sense of smell and a severely diminished sense of taste. When you can't taste flavor normally, you have to rely heavily on texture and mouthfeel to actually enjoy what you're eating.
Because of this condition, Ben became their ultimate extreme taste tester. They instituted this incredibly strict rule. Absolutely no batch was allowed to be sold unless Ben could identify the flavor completely blindfolded. To actually make that happen with a guy who has no sense of smell, Jerry had to start adding double the normal quantities of ingredients just to create something intense enough to pass Ben's blindfold test.
Because Ben needed that texture to experience the food, they started tossing in these larger fruit chunks and massive chocolate pieces. The result was this ultra-premium, heavily chunked ice cream packed with intensely unique flavors. Think about your favorite pint of premium ice cream today. That whole heavily chunked style? It was born entirely out of an accommodation for anosmia. What started as a physical disadvantage became the exact thing that made their brand so incredibly famous and beloved worldwide. It's like a giant puzzle piece falling right into place.
Section 3. David versus the Doughboy. Fighting a massive monopoly.
Now, to survive their own early success and avoid losing money by overscooping at their store, they had pivoted to packing wholesale pints. By 1983, pint sales had doubled to over $1.8 million. But take a look at the premium ice cream market share landscape in 1984.
The corporate giant Pillsbury had just bought Haagen-Dazs, which controlled a massive 70% of the premium ice cream market. And Pillsbury, they did not like this scrappy Vermont company threatening their sales. So they issued this ruthless ultimatum to distributors. You either stock Haagen-Dazs or you stock Ben & Jerry's. You cannot stock both. Now for the distributors, choosing this 70% market leader was a total no-brainer. Literally overnight, Ben & Jerry's started losing their distribution. They hit a massive wall.
Obviously, they didn't have the millions of dollars required for an expensive legal battle against a corporate giant. Instead, they unleashed a brilliant guerrilla PR response directly to the court of public opinion. Step 1, they launched the incredibly catchy slogan, "What's the doughboy afraid of?" pointing the finger right at Pillsbury's beloved mascot. Step 2, they scraped together whatever funds they had left for a full-page ad in Rolling Stone magazine and plastered posters everywhere they could. And Step 3, they set up a dedicated customer hotline, actively encouraging everyday people to call in, learn about the monopoly, and then directly call Pillsbury to complain. And the result? It was exactly what they hoped for. I mean, we all love a good David versus Goliath story, right? The public completely rallied around them. The backlash against Pillsbury was immense. Ultimately, that public pressure forced Pillsbury to back down, the distributors came back, and this whole stunt brought in a massive wave of brand new customers who just wanted to support the little guy.
Which leads us to Section 4, changing the rules, building a new kind of business.
So they had beat the monopoly, but the sheer stress of running a rapidly growing business was absolutely crushing them. They hated corporate life so much that they were actually ready to call a broker, sell the whole company, and just walk away. But then a friend gave them a piece of advice that changed absolutely everything. If there's something you don't like about business, change it. Actually, scratch that. It wasn't just advice, it was a total epiphany for them. They realized they didn't have to run their company like a traditional corporation. They could rewrite the rules of corporate America to fit their own ethics and actually use their business as a force for good.
So they rolled out this incredibly unconventional ethical blueprint. Policy 1. They set a strict maximum salary ratio where the highest earner could only make 5 times what the lowest paid employee made. Policy 2. They committed a massive 7.5% of their annual pre-tax profits to fund community-oriented projects. And Policy 3. When they needed $25 million to build a new factory, they launched an IPO, but they strictly limited the initial stock sale to residents of Vermont. They wanted their loyal, local community to be the ones to reap the rewards of ownership.
Now, financial experts completely laughed at this Vermont-only IPO. They called it totally naive, completely impractical, and warned it was a huge risk, that they would never raise the money. But Ben & Jerry proved them wrong. Miraculously, it paid off. They raised the full $25 million they needed, and overnight, 1% of all Vermont households became shareholders. This just generated an unbelievable amount of local goodwill.
And their unique approach to marketing? It just continued to fuel their growth. They launched the Cow Mobile, which was this modified mobile home, and drove across the U.S. giving out free ice cream. The founders were quite literally sleeping on mattresses on top of the freezers inside the RV. It was exhausting, sure, but it was brilliant publicity. The goodwill was so remarkably strong that by 1988, with revenues topping $32 million, these two former hippies were actually awarded the U.S. Small Business Persons of the Year by President Ronald Reagan. Incredible.
Section 5. The reluctant sellout, when operations start straining under the weight of success.
Despite their massive success, the physical and financial strain was starting to break them. Factory workers were pulling brutal 12-hour shifts, costs were spiraling out of control, and eventually their stock dropped almost 50% from its peak. They realized they needed to hire an experienced CEO, taking a step back from the daily grind. But, with blood in the water, the corporate sharks started circling. Then, in the year 2000, the massive conglomerate Unilever dropped a staggering number on the table, $326 million. The sheer dramatic weight of that offer was just too much to ignore. Because Ben & Jerry's was a public company, the board of directors essentially had a fiduciary duty to accept such a massive premium for the shareholders. The founders, who had always hated big corporations, were essentially forced to watch their company get sold.
However, before the deal officially closed, the Ben & Jerry's team pulled off one last, masterful negotiation. They convinced Unilever that the brand was uniquely valuable specifically because of its commitment to social justice. If Unilever dropped that mission, they argued, they would be actively devaluing their new $326 million asset. So they secured a massive strategic victory, an independent board committed to upholding the original company's values. Whether that meant advocating for fair trade, climate action, or taking public stances on social issues, they set it up so the soul of the company remained intact within the corporate machine, impartially pushing the specific causes the founders genuinely believed in.
Which brings us to our final thought for today. Can a business truly maintain its soul after a massive corporate buyout? It's a fascinating question, isn't it? Ben & Jerry's started as two kids failing gym class, navigating constant rejections, and scraping together a business in an icy, abandoned gas station. They leveraged their own physical limitations into brilliant product innovations, and they used their underdog status to beat a 70% monopoly. They proved without a doubt that you can challenge the traditional rules of business. Their incredible journey from outcast to building a billion-dollar empire leaves us with so much to think about regarding business, ethics, and staying true to your roots. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning how the rules can be rewritten in your own life.